Good morning, sunshines. This is Heather, known as BunniPhish on most social media. We are going to tackle 2 at a time cast-ons. I'm going to show you how to cast on for both toe up and cuff down. Cuff down can be used for more than socks, so you can also use it for sweater sleeves or fingerless mitts. I will be referring to the projects as socks for this entire video, but anytime you're making 2 of the exact same thing in the round, you can use 2 at a time. Some reasons you might want to use 2 at a time are 1, stretching your yarn as far as you can go. If you have yarn that you're not sure will take you to the entirety of a project, if you just knit 1 at a time, 2 at a time is a good way to make sure that your lengths are the same. Number 2, to make sure that what you do on the first item in your pair, you also do to the second item on your pair. So if you are doing, for instance, several sleeve decreases, you will know that they are in the same spot at the same rate if you do them 2 at a time. What you will need for 2 at a time is either a ball that you can pull from the center and the outside, or 2 separate balls. I'm going to be pulling from the inside and outside of my cakes. If you are going the method of from the inside and outside, a couple tips. If you have one, use a yarn cozy so that when you pull from the inside and outside, it keeps it really, really neat. You can purchase these from vendors or make them yourselves. I have a knitted pattern called Keep Calm and Shine Bright. You can also make them out of children's leggings that can't be donated because your daughter chews on all of her clothes. You will also need circular needles with a long cord. I like between 32 and 46 inch cords. When you work 2 at a time, you're working across the front of all of your stitches and then the backs of all of your stitches. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. We are going to start by casting on toe up. So it doesn't matter if you pull from the inside or the outside for your first sock. Another tip really quick is the side that has the center being pulled, keep that on the bottom. Keep that flat against your surface. It just helps keep things from getting tangled up. So we are going to cast on as normal for our first sock. I cast on 14 because that's what I like, but you will cast on whatever number is in your pattern or your preference. And then we're going to grab our other strand, slide these stitches over on the needle. You could slide them onto the cable. I prefer not to, because in the next step you need stitches from the first sock back on the needle. So then you just have to fuss with things that you could have just left. So now we have our stitches cast on. We're going to twist the short tail around the long working yarn. We're going to turn our needle 180 degrees, put it in our left hand. So now we have a top needle and a bottom needle. We're going to pull the bottom needle out and through, and now we have our 2 socks cast on. You can either go straight into your increases, or I like to do a half round of just knit straight before going into increases. So I'm going to knit across. It's important to make sure that you are using your working yarn and not your tail yarn. I can't even quantify how many times I have made that mistake and had to tink back so that I could work across properly. When you get to the end of your first sock toe, you will drop the yarn that you were working with and pick up the working yarn for the second sock. This is very important. If you mess up on this step, you will have to tink back. You cannot fix it without tinking. I have also done that countless number of times. Okay, we are across our needle, and that is basically everything you need to know about casting on toe up. You just continue to work by rotating 180 degrees, putting your stitches on the needle on top, and then working across, making sure to change yarn when it's appropriate. I will do heel tutorials, so check back for those. And if this is past the time that those are posted, they will be linked up above. For casting on cuff down, there are a couple optional tools that I will be using. I will be using a crochet hook. This is a size F, which is a 3.25, and it is a little bit bigger than the needles that I will be casting on, which are a 2.25. And I will be using a stitch marker. You do not need either of these things, but I find that they make things easier for me. And same idea, when you are casting on, you want inside and outside. It doesn't matter which one you start with. You want your needles. I am going to cast on using this crochet hook because that is my preferred method for anything that needs to be stretchy. You could absolutely do this any way that you like casting on. This is just the way that I like to. So if you're using a different cast on, no problem. If you are using a different cast on, no problem. The steps are the same, it will just look a little different as you're doing them. So we're going to take one end and begin casting on. And you want to cast on half of the number of stitches that you will have for the project. So if you are doing 60 stitches, you're going to cast on 30. If you're doing 72 stitches, you will cast on 36. If you're doing 54 stitches, you will cast on 27. I have half of my number of stitches. Now I am going to find the other end and cast on the full number of stitches for the second sock. But when I get to the halfway point, that is when I am going to use that stitch marker. I am to halfway, I'm going to pop the stitch marker in. That step is absolutely optional. I just find that it makes the next step much easier. So now I'm going to continue on casting on the second half of my second sock. Now that you have your second sock completely cast on, it is time to finish casting on the first. So we're going to slide these stitches onto the cable, and where our stitch marker is marking, we're going to fold the cable in half. And now we want to line up the edge of our first sock with this needle so we can cast on. Now, if you were casting on using a knitted cast on, for instance, you would start casting on into this loop as normal, and then continue casting on. So that first loop is a little bit fiddly, but once you get it, you just continue casting on. I am going to go back to my crochet hook and cast on that way. I'll see you at the other side. So now we have both parts, both halves of both socks cast on. So we're going to pull this needle out, and we are going to get ready to work on the first half of both of our socks. Before we do though, it's important to make sure that you are going to join in the round without a twist. And the way that I like to do that is I like to make sure that the bottoms of all of my stitches are on the inside of the needles. So now I am going to knit across. Now I am ready to start knitting across the first half of the second sock, and again I want to make sure that before I attach the work to work in the round that all of my bottoms are on the inside, so I know that there's no twist. And I also want to make sure that I'm using the correct yarn to knit across, because if you continue on with the yarn from the first sock, the only way to fix it is to tink back. So now I'm all set up. I'm going to knit across the first half of the second sock. And now that we are at the end of this needle, we no longer need the stitch marker, so you can go ahead and remove it, or you can use it to mark which needle is your front needle and which is your back. I usually know that because the start of the round is designated by this strand of yarn from the cast on. And then you will just continue working around and around in the same fashion as you would normally, but you'll just know that you're working across half of the sock and then half of the other sock, and then half of one sock and half of the other on each needle. Thank you so much for joining me to learn how to cast on 2 at a time, and definitely check back for the heel tutorials for 2 at a time. Bye!